All right, I'm being joined by Doug Luther, a good friend and colleague of mine in the franchise industry. And Doug is when we've interacted, it's been him on the franchisor side. I'm typically on the franchisee side generally. So I thought it'd be interesting for us to chat a bit about franchise exits and our perspectives on those. Doug, will you introduce yourself? Tell us what you're doing now. I know you just made the jump to the private side, right? Private
practice. So I was in-house counsel for 2.5 years at a franchisor, and now I'm running my own firm, doing kind of a mix of primarily franchisee, but also a number of franchisors, including as outside general counsel for the one I used to work for. And so I probably have a lot of different perspectives on how these terminations can go and exits and how people can negotiate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I've seen actually starting to come back into view. So typically, so I'll just say for all of our viewers, typically franchise exits, you'll get as a franchise attorney, like in private practice, you'll get probably one a month, maybe one every other month. It's just kind of here and there. Whenever there's starting to be a little slowdown, potential recession, or people getting a little scared, you'll start to see that more common. And I'm starting to see it more common, at least in the requests to our firm. So I'm Skylar Rocky Reidel with Reidel Law Firm. I'm a private practitioner. I've not been in-house, and I've not been in a big firm. I've always been a small solo guy working with franchisees and franchisors. And Doug and I are members of the forum on franchising, and we've interacted there. So So Doug, let's chat about the franchise exit process. So typically the franchise exit process is usually, I would say it's very typically initiated by a franchisee, and that's usually my role. I get a call randomly, someone telling me, hey, we're having trouble keeping the doors open. We're floating payroll, month to month at this point. We need to see how we exit. And I chat with them about the options, obviously. Ideally, selling the unit. A sale of the unit is ideal, or a transfer, an assignment. A negotiated exit is another option. That's a good one. And lastly, which is, you probably don't want to hear this as being former in-house, right? But lastly is ultimately an abandonment, right? So tell us about, from a franchisor perspective, in your experience, what are the options available, and what success have you had?
Yeah. So thanks for having me. And then on the franchisor side, I mean, you're going to know generally what the board performers look like, right? You're going to be monitoring your franchisees' performance. You're going to be looking at their bottom line, their top line on a monthly basis, if not more often. And so, they have a sense of kind of who are poor performers. They also, in terms of ones that have been around, but also new ones, hey, if the average time to open is 5 months and this person's, 8 months in and hasn't opened, that's something they're going to take note of too. So I think optimally on the franchisor side, they're already aware of that situation and hopefully proactively, looking at, okay, here are our struggling franchisees. What can we do to help them? Is it an operator issue? Is it a location issue? Is it a training issue? And we just need to provide some level of support, and that'll kind of turn the corner. Yeah. Sometimes with smaller franchisors, it's because the franchisee isn't fully committed. Maybe the franchisee has a full-time job elsewhere and just hasn't put in the time to develop the franchise. And so, it's kind of understanding what the dilemma is and then looking to resolve it. And I think, probably from before you ever get that first call, usually there's a lot of back and forth with the franchisee typically in terms of what can we do to help resolve this? What is the actual issue that's underlying kind of the lack of success?
You're definitely correct. And you did mention one thing I missed, which is common as well, is a structured workout, right? How do we work out the issues and come to an agreement either with some extra support, some additional training, and get through that tough time, those hurdles that the franchisee is struggling with. And you're right, I get called typically after that, after those fail, or maybe they've already tried some workouts or tried some retraining, and for whatever reason the market turned, or sometimes they're not the right fit. We can be honest about it, and they're not the right fit for the system. But that's a great perspective. So ideally, it sounds like for franchisors, structured workouts are probably ideal, number one. Number two would be what, I guess, a sell or a sale, or would it be a managed exit?
Yeah, and I think it kind of depends on what the underlying issue, right? Is it And it also depends on the franchisor, right? If the franchisor has a lot of company-owned locations, the franchisor might be interested in just taking over that location itself and
Yeah.
basically flipping it, getting it working better and more profitable and higher revenue, and then selling it to a new franchisee. I think from the franchisor's perspective, the last thing you want is either an abandonment or a lawsuit, right? Those are the things you're trying to avoid.
100%.
You and a franchisor financially, oftentimes they haven't really made money off the beginning of the process, right? The initial franchise fee can often go to brokers, commissions, or salaries to the franchise development side, all the marketing and advertising. It goes to training, it goes to site selection, leasing assistance, all that stuff that's on the front end. And so for the franchisor to really be making its money for the most part, it relies on that regular royalty going forward. And so when a business is facing a potential shutdown, then that's really a failure for both the franchisee and franchisor. It's not like the franchisor has made a ton of money and that's not a good situation for the franchisor.
Long-term game, right, for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for the franchisor perspective, is it an operator issue, right? Because if it's an operator issue, it's okay. Have we tried to train him? Is that working? If it doesn't work, okay, can we sell this location to somebody else? I think a transfer, like you said, is probably the next best option. Can we find somebody else, especially for like a restaurant franchisor or one where there's a huge build out and a lot of cost involved? And okay, we've sunk hundreds of thousands of dollars, the franchisee has, into building this location. Maybe this works with a different operator. And so maybe we can find somebody for them.
Definitely. I would agree. And even for franchisees, I would say ideally a structured workout would be top of the list, depending on their disposition and what exactly is wrong. Mutual termination or mutual exit would be maybe a tie, right, or a close second. And then a sale of the unit or a sale would definitely be up there as well, because that allows the franchisee, and some of my clients that I've helped, it helps them realize some of the value, right, that they put into that unit. Now, obviously that has a lot of factors: what it is, what the market looks like, how they're performing, how much value they'll get back for it. But ultimately, the last option there, abandonment, is never attractive, even to franchisees, I'll say, because that means you are walking away from everything. You can't go and sell the assets. You can't go and sell the inventory or whatever, the equipment typically. It is literally closing the door and walking away. And it's not an easy decision to make. Very rarely have I ever had a client contemplating it. And I feel like I've had maybe one or two clients who have had to pull that trigger, but it was basically on the heels of a bankruptcy filing, right? It was basically where there was nothing left. And I don't remember, I'd have to double check my files to be specific about why we didn't work it out with the franchisor, but sometimes franchisors can really dig their heels in. And I'll tell you, one of the areas where I've seen them dig in lately or recently is in terms regarding the liquidated damages, which is basically the exit fee. And I've got some videos discussing that or describing that to folks watching my channel. But liquidated damage is basically an exit fee. Whenever you decide you have to close down, you and the franchisor agree to that, but you also have to pay a fee, right? And that's usually a formula. Now, a lot of good franchisors and franchise systems will take the circumstances into consideration about why this is being closed, what's happened, whether they're out of money, it just wasn't a good fit or the wrong market, things like that, where the liquidated damages is negotiable. But I've had circumstances where franchisors can really dig their heels in and eye that liquidated damages as a compensation. What are your thoughts? So being in-house, you've made those decisions. You've made those analysis of what to collect and maybe when to collect it in regards to liquidated damages or some form of it, depending on your franchise agreement. So tell me about that process. What do franchisors think about liquidated damages and how they go through that analysis?
Yeah, and I've seen that franchisors take very different perspectives on this. Yeah. I mean, I think what's most typical that I've seen is somewhere around like a 2 to 3 year kind of royalties and fees. And that's the exit payment of liquidated damages. I'm not the biggest fan of liquidated damages because I think for me, I see kind of two kind of situations that arise frequently. One, you've got a franchisee who's failed. They've invested maybe a ton of money in this, maybe $500,000, maybe $1 million or more. And you're kind of squeezing blood from the stone, right? They're basically going into bankruptcy or they don't have the money to pay it. And so in that situation, ultimately you might not be recouping anything. And then you've got situations where, well, maybe this person's exiting because now they're going to run a competing business and they're doing great they are taking your trade secrets and they're running with it and they're basically going out to kind of run a competing entity. In that circumstance, I don't want to be limited in my damages. I want to come after them for 10 years or more. And so sometimes I think liquidated damages is not a great solution to a lot of the problems or issues you face with. But I think for a lot of franchisors, it's probably a starting point of negotiation, with a franchisee. And I think it depends on the circumstance. It's very fact specific. Obviously if the franchisee has no money, what are you going to do? Right. It's like they're going to go into bankruptcy and that's not necessarily a good result for anyone. And so sometimes it's working with what they do have. Sometimes it's saying, hey, this person hasn't complied by our rules. They haven't worked with us. And so we're going to stick to liquidated damages. They haven't even given this a shot. So I think it depends. And I think franchisors take you've probably seen this too, but the franchisors will take very different perspectives on that. And some will say, hey, mutual termination, you can walk away. And some will say, give me, $300,000 in liquidated damages first. And it's a big spectrum right there.
Yeah, it's a big stick, right, that they wield with that in regards to an exit. So it's the same. I mean, and that is an analysis that we go through on the franchisee side as well, as figuring out where's the baseline that we're starting from and how can we work this out. And I counsel my clients is really, let's think about what type of I would say leverage, but I don't want to have a negative connotation to that. But basically, what kind of leverage can we offer to the franchisor? Can we make this a seamless transition? Can we, do we have a great client list, or do we have some great team members that we can pass along to corporate, right, or to the next owner, or maybe the next franchisee, the next territory over or something? Even if it isn't even if we have to close down and it isn't the right business relationship at this time, what value can the franchisee offer and extend to the franchisor to make that mutual exit very easy and reasonable for everybody? And hopefully that will also affect their calculation on liquidated damages and make it a bit more easy for them to understand, reducing some of that initial compensation on the liquidated damages and hopefully doing something a little easier on the back end. But that's what I counsel my clients, and it is successful, I guess, in general, because obviously a lot of us in the franchise bar, we know a lot of each other, and we do deals all the time, and we recognize that, hey, sometimes our clients aren't the right fit for the right system, and what have you. Things happen, so we just have to make the best deal possible. As it's very rarely a win or a loss for either side, right? It's what gradient of a loss do we have on either side, or a win, right? It's never a zero-sum game. We're all trying to get the best deal for everybody, right? In exiting, or whatever the transaction may be. So let me ask you, let me ask you what your process is. So I talked a little bit about mine, but I guess I can expand in afterwards or before you like. But I'm curious, what is your process for counseling on an exit to a franchisor or maybe a franchisee? Since you work with both, can you share what the differences are there when you're counseling either?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you come in the franchise situation, like you were talking about, you're coming in oftentimes late in the process where things have devolved and, hey, we can't get any traction with the franchisor. Can you help me get traction? And sometimes that's like a trust deficit. At that point, there can be a trust deficit between the franchisor and franchisee, and finger pointing, right? Like, who's to blame for this, right? And so I think it's important, and the lawyers to help the clients with the communication, right? Because it makes a difference if the franchisor has been included. Hey, I tried to do this in the business, it didn't work. Hey, I tried your other marketing plan, it didn't work. I tried this other solution, it didn't work. And hey, look, here's my numbers. I'm losing, 5,000 a month. I have only 40,000 left in my loan, and I'm running out of runway, right? And I think if you are communicating all that, to the franchisor, you're going to get a very different reception than if, hey, I never told the franchisor anything, and by the way, I got to shut down, franchisor. Can you let me shut down? Like, I think if if you're having that open dialogue and they understand that you've done things to try to make it work, that you are communicating to them and they understand why financially it's not working for you, that they believe that it's not financially, not like, hey, maybe it is working for you, just going to go down the street and start, Doug's Burgers instead of, the franchise. And so I think having that dialogue is important. I think on the franchisor side, oftentimes you're getting involved earlier, right? And if you're inside counsel, you're definitely getting involved earlier. Outside counsel, you may not even ever get involved. But you're communicating to them and you're saying, well, do we know why this person's not working? Have we tried this? Have we tried that? And you're connecting them really a lot of times to the operations side. And you're saying, hey, what's your problems? I want you to talk to operations. I want you to talk to the training and support. And I want to see if we can find a way to solve these problems, And sometimes it's operator issues. Sometimes it's location. Sometimes it's something unforeseen. Maybe it's someone has a medical condition, or like their family member comes down with something. There's so many different fact patterns, and sometimes it's, hey, like, maybe it's you just have to step away from the business for a little bit, but we don't need to shut it down. And so I think diagnosing the problem and trying to solve for that before we ever get to the legal side, I think is the key on the in-house side, is trying to work with them. And I think on a franchisor perspective too, you've got to kind of take all your steps, right? You got to cross your T's and dot your I's. And so, you got to send a notice of default, and you might send a warning letter before that notice of default. And hey, you haven't paid. Hey, you haven't cured. Here's your second notice of default. And so, after a lot of state statutes, you really have to give them the opportunity to cure those defaults. And I think also just on an equity side, it's kind of like, let's give this person as many opportunities as we can to show that we tried to work with them. And so on the legal side in-house, it's like you're drawing that record, right? You're building it out. You're providing the legal documents saying, Judge, I gave this guy 5 times to fix shop, to cure the default. And he didn't do it. And I think, and then you can hand that record off to your outside counsel, litigating, or if you're the outside counsel, you take it and run with it. But, I think that's kind of the perspective, 1, can we solve it? And 2, let's make sure we're documenting this correctly for legal purposes.
Definitely. Yeah. So I love that you mentioned communication. I would also tell listeners, potential franchisee listeners, to communicate with your attorney, with the franchisee attorney, because I've been in a situation, I'm sure you have too in your career, where I have represented a franchisee and I thought I had the story and go into the franchisor to negotiate, and oops, I didn't have the story. I had a very different version of the story and was blindsided with some additional, facts or circumstances that really changed the calculation for how our strategy was to proceed. That's fantastic. That's one thing that you want to do as a franchisee potentially exiting. Communicate with your attorney, and with your attorney, strategize, if you haven't already, with communicating with your franchisor, how to work with them, how to make those conversations fruitful and productive for everybody. Do
you find that sometimes you're probably advising the franchisee, not communicating directly, right? You might be ghostwriting for them or giving them advice on how to, respond to the franchisor?
I do that more often in deal making. Before they're signing, I don't typically get involved with the negotiations. I'm behind the scenes, just because usually when I get in the room, then the other attorney has to get in the room, and both of us, we don't know what the salespeople said. Sure. So we're starting all over, right? It's like, just let the salespeople deal with that and we'll write it up. But on an exit, usually I will take lead. I'll tell you that. Often it's because the franchisees, at least in my experience and the folks that I've counseled, they feel, how should I phrase it? They don't feel confident, I guess, in getting in the room and battling it out themselves. They want they want someone on their side, right? They want a shield bearer, right, so to speak, to take those blows and kind of advance their agenda. So oftentimes I'm the one handling the calls and the emails, and I just tell the client, look, let me make the initial overtures. Let's see what we can let's boil the issues down to some bullet points, and then we'll talk through the bullet points and make sure where we stand, where they stand, and find out how we can go about it, closing the deal the right way, right, or exiting the deal the right way. But yeah, that's a good question. It's I certainly could be behind the scenes if my client wanted me to, but I'll tell you, most of the time they're not as confident as probably they could be or should be in dealing with a franchisor. And it's obvious, right? There's a power disparity to some extent in the contracts. So I don't know. I mean, tell me about yours. Is that same?
I've seen that too. It's always funny on the in-house side, basically saying, "Oh, I know this is a lawyer writing this." Behind the scenes, you can often tell by the way it's written. Okay, there's a lawyer advising here, and sometime at that point, it's like, okay, well, it's better. I can just communicate with the attorney. It's easier rather than playing kind of this game of telephone, where we have this intermediary. But sometimes I think it depends on the franchisees I've advised. There are situations where I don't think they've made the outreach yet on a more informal basis. And so there might be some benefit to say, hey, why don't you, somebody over at the franchise, or, hey, you're friends with the CEO, or the chairman, or so-and-so over there, why don't you talk with that person, explain what's going on and see if you can get some traction with that person. And so sometimes that's like a first attempt, but I think often like probably where, they're coming to you and where the franchisees have come to me, they've already tried that, right? Now that didn't work, and they need the lawyer to get involved to see if they can get some traction.
I've had some where I've stepped into it, into the negotiations, and it's been going on for almost a year. It's crazy on the exit. It's like, oh man,
it's a lot of time to lose money.
Well, so you mentioned that you could tell when a lawyer would write a letter when you get something from someone in the house. Did you ever notice whenever you would get a letter from the lawyer and you knew that the lawyer didn't write it, or that there was sections there that the client insisted on including? Because I see those and I've had to write those, right?
Yeah. You can usually tell that, here's the legal claims. And by the way, here's the things I'm complaining about the franchisor, right? And there's kind of just throw in the kitchen sink kind of thing.
There's sometimes a little venting in legal letters, and franchise attorneys, we know that, right? We've done it. We've been there. So that's funny. So Doug, I think we've had a fantastic chat about franchise exits. So you were out on the West Coast, right? Tell us about how folks can reach out to you if they need some help.
Yeah. So Luther Firm, you go to lutherfirm.com. I advise both franchisors and franchisees from Orange County, California. So happy to assist anybody who needs it.
Very cool. Very cool. Yep. And I'm Skylar Rocky Reidel. I'm down in Texas when I'm not traveling overseas. But I do the same. I work with franchisors, franchisees. We work all over the industry with folks. And of course, we refer folks around. So if something I can't handle, obviously we'll send you to Doug and make sure he takes care of you. And
vice versa. I don't have a cowboy hat, so I don't go into court in Texas anytime soon.
Definitely. You get some boots at least, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll put some links in the description on my channel, and feel free to use it how you like, Doug. But this is a really great chat. I hope we can do it again. Maybe in the future we'll talk about other aspects of franchising and kind of a head-to-head perspective. It's really interesting to do that. And I think that's valuable for franchisees and franchisors who are dealing with this on the front lines every day.
Definitely. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Have a good one, Doug.
You too.